Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Mothership Audio Podcast, where we talk about all things audio related. I'm your host, Alex, and I'm joined today by my co host, Efe.
Hi guys.
And we have a very special guest for our first episode, video game music composer Nikita Jeremić, who worked on such titles that you may have heard of, such as Destiny and Cyberpunk.
Hey guys, how's it going?
And thanks for coming on, Nikola. We're really happy to have you here.
And thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, we basically thought about starting at the beginning of your career, and I'm pretty sure everybody's curious about how you got started on composing for video games.
Oh, okay. Well, that was a pretty long road, basically. When I was a kid in high school, I think I was like 17 or 18, something like that. I started a band, and then it failed miserably, as it usually happens with high school bands. So then I decided it was like a symphonic heavy metal type of band, and then most of my bandmates were, everybody had like their own set of obligations aside from the band. So I mean, we were kids, nobody was that serious into having a serious band when you were 17. So I decided to leave the band and continue on my own. So I actually learned to play guitar while I was in high school, and then during my time with the band I started learning to play other instruments like keyboards and bass guitar and stuff like that. So I sold one of my guitars, I bought a keyboard, started practicing playing piano and keyboard, that sort of thing. And it was at that time, I think it was like winter slash summer of 2007 and 2008. I think that's when I started experimenting and exploring other types of music outside of the traditional rock and roll and heavy metal type of music, which I went mostly into ambient and symphonic, orchestral music, movie soundtracks, game soundtracks, stuff like that. So at that time I was listening pretty much a lot of Enya and Vangelis and Hans Zimmer, John Williams, that sort of thing. And when I started listening to that, I started picking up on ideas. I explored and researched about all the sound that takes to create like an ambient type of music or a soundtrack type of music. So I started creating some of my own ideas, started my own solo project, which also failed miserably, but that led to actually putting myself out there as a music artist and as a composer who who wants to create music for media, like television, films, video games, and stuff like that. But I can even say that my interest in soundtracks started way back when I was like in later years of my elementary school, in my like early teens, I was like 13 or something like that. I was playing a lot of Halo at that time. And
Who wasn't
I
anyway?
what
Who wasn't playing Halo at that time anyway?
Yeah, like
Right?
seriously, who wasn't playing Halo? It was like 2003. That was like the time when Halo 2 came out for Xbox, and everybody was playing Halo at the time. It's like the game that sort of like established the multiplayer first person shooter as we know today, like the multiplayer segment of first person shooter games as we know it today. So that was like Halo had a huge impact on me as a composer due to the music. Like the first thing that you ever it's epic. Like seriously, the first thing that you hear in this when you open the main menu of a Halo, it's that main theme that the choirs are singing and everything, which was, and first time I heard that, I was like, yeah, it would be pretty cool that I do this for the rest of my life, when I grow up. So, and it kind of like led everything led to that, like my life decisions, my interests in video games and in films led to, me showing interests into soundtracks, into ambient music, scores, and stuff like that. So un- it was in my like early student years at university. It was like 2010 maybe. Yeah, late 2010 when I got my first gig as a film composer on this, B production horror movie, which also played which also failed miserably. Everything, as you can see, the point for like the recipe for becoming a successful composer in media is that you gotta fail miserably a couple of times before you hit it big.
Take a note, our listeners, please.
Yeah, take notes, people. Like, you gotta fail a lot.
There we go. And so, what was your first project in this journey?
Yeah, so that movie was called 6 Days of Dark. I think that was the name of the film. Yeah, I had absolutely zero experience when it came to composing music for films at that time. And they came to me and like, hey, you want to do a soundtrack for this film? So I went like full guns blazing into it. I didn't know how to sync music to picture. I didn't know how to, I watched the film. My first try at that was like I watched the film in real time and I was playing music to the scenes, like absolutely no sync, no time codes, no nothing. I just literally went all in. Like I was like in the 20s and early 1920s and 1930s when you see a guy playing that busted up upright piano in a corner of a movie theater where people are watching old Mickey Mouse pictures and that was me doing a horror movie like that, just watching it on a TV, and I was just playing music into my DAW so I can like, and then I just had to kind of like tweak the starts and end points of music in order to kind of like sync it to what I wanted it to do. So it was a pain in the ass, but it was a lot of trial and error, until I actually became sort of like established in this industry. I mean, I'm not an award-winning composer, nor I consider myself to be a heavy hitter whatsoever. I just do the thing that I love, and people recognize that, and that's why they hire me today, because they see that I'm a game nerd. Aside from composing music for games, I love playing them. When I'm not composing, I'm usually playing, exploring video games. But my first big hit when it comes to up until there was like a 4-year period between 2010 and 2014 that I was doing mostly short films and feature films and short animated films. That was my thing at that point. And then it was in 2014 when I went to a conference in Los Angeles that was held by the Audio Engineering Society, or the AES. It was held in LA. I went there, and in the middle of the hallway of Los Angeles Convention Center, I meet Marty O'Donnell, who composed music for Halo. And I was like, okay, so this is okay. Just look cool, look normal. Don't freak out. That's just Marty O'Donnell. He's your hero. And so I see him approaching to me. I was a volunteer for that conference. So my kind of like assignment was to point people in the right directions where they need to go. And I saw him just like, walking around the hallway, and I approached him and I said like, "Sir, are you lost? Do you need some help?" And he was like, "No, I'm just walking around." Okay. And then the next thing, like the first thing that comes out of my mouth, I'm like, "Holy shit, you're Marty O'Donnell." And he's like, "Yeah, that's what it says on my name tag." So I asked him like, yeah. So I asked him like, "Yeah, would it be okay if we take a picture? Your work on Halo has inspired me to to become a composer, to start pursuing a career in game music. And I've never done game music before, before that moment." So he said like, "Yeah, sure, why not?" So we took a selfie. I posted it on Facebook, and then a couple of hours after me posting that picture, I got a friend request from his coworker from Bungie Studio, whose name is Michael Salvatore. He is the current audio director of Bungie Studio, and he was also responsible for Halo music together with Marty. So he sent me a friend request. We started chatting. Mike got interested into listening to my portfolio, so I sent him my portfolio. He really loved it. And then we, stayed in touch for the next like 2 years or so. And in the meantime, when I got back from LA, I got my first gig in Novi Sad here in Serbia as a composer for a game studio called Mad Head Games here in Serbia. So I stayed with them from 2014 up until the late 2018. For like 4 years, I was their outsourced composer for a couple of their game franchises. Those were hidden object puzzle adventures. The game series were called Maze. There were 4 games in the series that I scored, and there was another one that was called Shadow Play. I also scored 3 games from the series, and Adam Wolf was another game that I worked with them, and Pagan Online, which is now called Pagan Absent Gods, which is like a action RPG in the style of Blizzard's Diablo 3. So those were the games that I worked on at that time. But it wasn't until 2016 that I got a call again from Michael Salvatore from Bungie Studio, and he said like, "Do you remember when we talked?" It was I remember it was June in 2016. I was about to go to the Arsenal Festival in Kragujevac, and I get a call from Mike Salvatore, and he says like, "Hey, are you available on Skype? I want to talk to you about something." And then I was like, "Yeah, sure, why not?" So we got onto a Skype call. Then he said like, "You remember when 2 years ago you and I talked first, and I said there will be an opportunity for the two of us to work together. And before I say anything to you, I need you to sign this NDA agreement, and so we can continue our talk." And I was like, "Yeah, sure, why not?" So I signed it, and he said like, "Okay, so now that we got this all signed, we're working on Destiny 2. We need another guy, and I'd like you to be that guy."
Wow.
So I'm like, okay, I'm trying to keep my poker face, like he asked me like, "If you're available, of course,
You're like,
So
"Yeah,
I'm
sure.
trying to
Yeah,
keep
well,
my,
I'm available. Why
yeah,
not?"
like, yeah,
I gotta
sure,
check
why
my
not?
schedule
Of
first,
course.
but yeah.
Yeah, I was like, yeah, okay, so we got this settled. You're working with us on Destiny. I'm going to introduce you to my coworker, Sky Levine, who's also one of the lead composers on the game. You're going to be doing some additional music for the gameplay and stuff like that. You'll be doing mostly a hybrid orchestral approach to all of this, and we need you to send us your audio assets, and so we can record it with a full symphony orchestra in Ocean Way Studio. And I was like, "Oh my God, it's Ocean Way Studio!" So it was my first gig with a real symphony orchestra, which is like an amazing experience when you're a young composer, to have your music played by one of the world-renowned orchestras in a really, really amazing hall, which is like, it's like everybody who's in this industry wants to have their music recorded with an orchestra. So it really was a big deal for me, and that gig opened a lot of doors for me later on, which then led to my gig with composer Doyle Donahue on Games Workshop's Warhammer 40K Battlefleet Gothic Armada, which is another franchise which I absolutely love. So it really was, and Doyle is like a mentor to me, and I like to call him my musical father, because he really is educating me and raising me to be like a pro composer, because I learned so much, from working with him on Warhammer titles, and that then led to eventually to collaboration with Marcin Przybylovich from CD Projekt Red, where we worked, where I was one of the additional music artists on Cyberpunk 2077, which is like the big hit right now.
For the last
And
8 years,
regarding-
I think it was the big hit. with
Yeah.
all the hype and everything.
Look, it would
Yeah,
never
like
live
the
up to the
la-
hype, but it's still a great game. That's the whole point of it. It just, I think people still need to kind of like calm down about it, because I think visually and story-wise, it's just something else, and I think that it'll eventually reach a certain level that it needs.
Yeah, CD Projekt Red is a type of studio that lives up to their promise. So even with all the gimmicks that happened during the release, I mean, I'm not that much in contact with them, so I don't have the right information. But history has shown that CD Projekt Red always lives up to their promise, and that is why they are a studio that enjoys quite a lot of respect amongst fans, and that is why Witcher Wild Hunt is like one of the games that had the most impact to the gaming scene during the last decade, like this decade that's about to, and like Witcher Wild Hunt really has established and like an action RPG and storytelling. They set the standard for all future games in the genre. And they also had, I mean, when Wild Hunt came out, that was the third Witcher, there was a lot of, it was also buggy at the point, but they always fixed their stuff. So even with everything that happened during the release, I think that it still is the biggest selling game of the year.
Yeah,
Looks
I mean,
like-
you
And
can't
maybe
argue
even the
about
decade.
how great The Witcher Wild Hunt is. I mean, it is also, it'll probably be one of the best games of all time. It already is now, actually. But actually, I want to ask you about that, because I know that you're partnered with the Vienna Symphony Library.
Mm-hmm.
And what would you say? Would you kind of like say that partnership kind of made the sounds of these kind of like fantasy games, these kind of epic, orchestral moments, such as like in Witcher, which has quite a bit of orchestral stuff as well, besides the Percival band Slavic folk sounds?
Yeah, well, my involvement in Witcher Wild Hunt, I wasn't actually a composer on the project itself. So you won't hear my music in the game. I applied because I knew Marcin, their audio director and the lead composer. I knew him via Facebook before we met in person in LA like 4 years ago. But it was in 2015 that I applied for one of their competitions that they decided to give out some of the music assets from Wild Hunt, and they allowed artists to create their own views of the music from The Witcher Wild Hunt. So at that time, I was heavily collaborating with a lot of Russian folk heavy metal bands, like the Slavic metal bands from Russia, like Kalevala and Grai, and I was working with a black metal band from Greece called Rotting Christ.
Oh,
So-
beautiful.
So I worked with them on their with Rotting Christ. I worked with them on a couple of songs from their album Rituals. So at that time, I was pretty much into this darker metal sound and more intense, and even darker stuff, pagan stuff, all of that, all of that. And I decided to create my own remix of Witcher Wild Hunt music by creating like how would a Witcher Wild Hunt album sounded if like a pagan metal band would have perform it. So I took the assets that they gave us for the competition, like performances from Percival, the symphonic orchestra, stuff like that, and then I played drums, bass, and guitars, down-tuned guitars on top of that, and created some of my stuff. I sent it off, and they liked it. They included it on that unofficial soundtrack release, which features like 15 songs or something like that. And that's when I got, I became friends with the audio team from CD Projekt Red, which then, kind of like opened the doors for me for working with Cyberpunk then. But when it comes to Vienna Symphonic Library, aside from being a composer and a musical sound designer, I'm not designing sounds like Foley's and sound effects and stuff like that. I'm talking about sound synthesis, creating synth patches, creating weird instruments that composers can use for their creations, and that I can use, some of my own stuff. So I do a lot of beta testing for a lot of software companies that that you probably know of, like guys like Sound Toys, Softtube, Sonox Oxford, Isotope, who else? Slate Digital, PreSonus,
Basically, all the majors in the market, let's say.
all the majors in the market, Steinberg, Vienna Symphonic Library, Orchestral Tools, stuff like that, So I do a lot of, beta testing for them, which means that I get to play with a lot of audio software in the early stages before their releases. So I get them, pretty banged up, and then I need to find the errors in the software and in the workflow and sound and stuff like that when it comes to like audio mixing plugins, or when it comes to sample libraries. So I report that with the team of beta testers, and then we help the developers to create the best possible version for the release. So yeah, that led me to collaboration with Vienna Symphonic Library. So I approached them, I told them who I am, what I'm doing, who am I working with, and they were interested in hearing, what my proposals are, what I have to, And so we started collaborating as I'm doing some, technical presentation and tutorial videos for them, and also testing out their libraries before they're released and all of that, which kind of like I like a lot of their stuff. I've been using them while I was an assistant at a couple of composer studios. I'm very well introduced to Vienna Symphonic Library, the quality of their instrument, and they're like 70% of my composing template comes from the Vienna Symphonic Library's instruments, like especially their synchronized special editions and stuff like that, which my students at the SA Institute are also using, because Vienna Symphonic Library has partnered with us at SA to provide students with the tools so they can practice and learn composing orchestral music on a computer. And so yeah, aside from that, that's my sort of like story with Vienna Symphonic Library. And there's always they are, in my own humble opinion, they are the pioneers of orchestral sampling. Like, they've been there when nobody had a clue how to sample a symphony orchestra and how to commercialize that in creating a commercial product that composers all over the world can use. And they had their own things at like since like 2005 2006. I
Right,
can't
yeah, I
remember
remember
exactly.
their first version from 2004, actually. Uh, like,
Yeah, that was for the Giga sampler. Yeah.
there you go, there you go.
And they were like the only ones at that time until like competition came out, and like the guys from East West Quantum Leap and stuff like that before they started out. And then Native Instruments has updated their Contact sampler a couple of times, and then as Contact grew more powerful, there was a lot of sample library developers who opted out for using Contact as a sampler for orchestral sampling, which still is an industry standard even today. But Vienna has always been there with their own creations, and I used to use their Vienna instruments, and I used their, I think it was like since 2014, maybe, no, 2013 is when I used their old Vienna instruments sampler with their Epic Orchestra, which came bundled with the Vienna Ensemble Pro, which is their like host application, which is like a mind-blowing software that enables you to connect a couple of more computers in your local area network and host various instruments via network, which then all of that gets bussed into your main computer for recording. So I have like two really powerful computers. That one of them is hosting my main symphony orchestra samples. The other one is hosting like my ethnic instruments, synthesizer, sound design stuff, and I am able to play everything in my DAW on my main computer and host a lot of other instruments on my second computer, and then send the MIDI and audio information in real time via LAN cable. So that's a pretty, like, Vienna Ensemble Pro is a really, really powerful software for composers, and it opens up a whole new world.
Seems like it. Like, amazing setup that you have mentioned over now regarding all these VSTs and the workflow itself. I think that this was pretty informative for a lot of listeners that are listening at the moment.
Oh,
But
absolutely.
we would like to get to a little bit of a casual part of this podcast.
Actually, before we do that, I would like to ask one more question, because
course,
I
of
want to
course,
do
sure.
I want to do a 180 and go back to Cyberpunk, because it is a different approach to composing. And since you mentioned Vangelis, I'm also a huge fan, and I think everybody would like to hear, like, what specific sounds did you use for Cyberpunk? What kind of old school synths are we talking, like Prophets, Oberheims, that kind of stuff?
When it comes to Cyberpunk, I used at that time, it was late, it was like, was it 2000 and, yeah, it was 2019 when I got involved into Cyberpunk. At that time, I owned only two small analog synthesizers, which are pretty dirt cheap, that anybody can afford, Korg Volca bass and Korg Volca keys. Those are my two main analog synths that I used for that soundtrack. And then the rest of the stuff was like, I was sampling live drums that then I chopped and sampled, and then I imported them into Studio One, which is my main DAW for composing. Then I imported that into Studio One's Atom, actually Impact sampler for drums, and I used my Atom key drum pads to trigger like my samples in this. It was a lot of sound design involved in that in Cyberpunk. Like, I recorded live instruments like guitars and live bass guitars, which then I completely destroyed with plugins and overdrives and various distortions and bit crushers in order to create that type of sound. There's a lot of distortion and analog gimmicks, pedals involved in. Like I had my main bass for the track called Brain Damage that I created for Cyberpunk was like a Volca bass, which has like 3 oscillators, which are slightly each one like my oscillator one is like tuned to be like spot on my tuner, like so it doesn't drift, but the 2 additional oscillators, one of them was kind of like tuned down with a couple of cents, so it kind of like creates that drifting sound, and then the 3rd oscillator was tuned up a couple of cents, so I create like a chorusing, slightly out of tune fat bass sound, which then had like I had an LFO rate modulating my filter cutoff just to get that wobbly, nice bass sound. And then the output of the Korg Volca went into an Overdrive, which was also another dirt cheap pedal by Harley Benton. It was like maybe $20 or something. It's called the Vintage Overdrive, which is like a one-on-one clone of Ibanez Tube Screamer. It gave it that sort of like a nicely overdriven warm sound. Then that went into a Big Muff fuzz pedal. So that was like the main bass sound of my track. And then I distorted kick drums, I distorted my snares and stuff like that. I even tuned the snare to the root note of the track, which was F sharp. So I tuned the snare like that. So when you hit the snare, you can hear an F sharp tone, but then it really goes into heavy overdrive. The snare drums and my lead sounds and stuff like that was Volca keys, and I used Urs Heckman Zebra on my Cyberpunk. But when it comes to that, analog synthy goodness, when it comes to space music and space ambient music, I utilized quite a lot of Arturia and my Behringer analog synthesizers on a soundtrack for a video game called Starpoint Gemini, and I'm the composer of the game series. In total, I composed like soundtrack for like the 3 of the games out of the 4 in the series. And this Starpoint Gemini 3, which came out this year, and earlier this year the game was in early access, but then we decided to release the soundtrack for Starpoint Gemini 3. That game has like that really, really Blade Runner-ish Vangelis type of a soundtrack, which has a lot of both analog hardware synths that went through actual outboard gear, like I had echo pedals, I had a whole bunch of chorus pedals, a whole bunch of effects pedals and effects processors from Lexicon, from TC Electronics, stuff like that I have lying around my studio. I even had a Korg Chaos pad for like performing effects like in real time on that. So I used a lot of analog synths on that, and it gives it that space ambient old school 80s type of sound, which I am a big fan of, and I am starting to believe that my niche of specialty actually goes into creating sci-fi sound designed music with analog synthesizers rather than being a full-fledged orchestral composer. But even when I'm working with an orchestra, I always have some sound design elements below my orchestral performances. So yeah, Cyberpunk and Starpoint Gemini are like 2 projects that really showcase what it is that I love doing when it comes to music composing.
Amazing, beautiful, especially the gears that you were using. It seems like you have so much process going on over there with all those gear and with all those processes. But this is so enlightening to hear in general on what you are using and what kind of music actually you are aiming for, or your signature sound. And probably our listeners are going to listen to your music in a more careful way. So maybe we can switch to the
Yeah, one
third topic.
thing
Yeah,
before we
please.
switch to the
Go for it.
casual part, one thing that I can always suggest to people, like, we are all, a music industry, audio industry is like it's like a fashion industry, it resides on setting trends and industry standards, stuff like that, that's popular, like, you know but I always like I will never forget a sentence from Eddie Kramer, when I also at that back then in 2014, when I met Marty O'Donnell on the hallway of that LA Convention Center. I also met Eddie Kramer, who is like the legendary music producer. He's the guy who's responsible for Jimi Hendrix sounding like Jimi Hendrix, and somebody from the audience after his lecture, he asked him, like, yeah, but the gear that you're using, like, what would you suggest for the people who want to get like some sort of sound? Like, and he said, like, do you know what's the best mix console in the world? And he says, like, it's the one that works. The one that you have and the one that works.
Absolutely.
And that's it. Like, people always shy from like buying cheap stuff. Like Behringer has become notorious in a way that like they're creating like quote unquote cheap stuff. Like people think of it as cheap in quality. I always like to think of Behringer as a company that opens up a whole new world for like young people who can't afford like expensive expensive gear, like, but I'm a synth nerd. I don't own a Moog. I don't own an Oberheim. I don't own a Prophet. I don't have a huge modular, system or something. I have synthesizers that on average cost $200, and I create a soundtrack that sounds, just as good as anybody else would, do it in the industry with expensive gear, because, the technology is out there. It's what you are paying. Basically, what you are paying for is the name tag. It's what it says on what dictates the price. I mean, with all due respect to all like the big companies, like, I'm endorsed by PreSonus. They're considered to be a mid-level, entry to mid-level priced a company that creates products. They have some pretty expensive stuff as well, but they are mostly there to cater to the bedroom producer, to home producers, and it is guys like them that have like enabled a whole bunch of kids, to create the music that they love in comfort, from the comforts of their own homes. And when people hear my music, and when people see my portfolio and my credits list where I worked on, like, oh dude, you gotta have like this pretty huge expensive studio where you're working on, like, no man, I have my audio interface is like $250. I have my keyboard is like Arturia key is it like
The key step,
Arturia
yeah.
key lab? No, it's not a key step, it's an Arturia Key Lab, like 49, which costs like $200. I have a Korg Volca, synthesizers, fully small format analog synthesizers, like, which is like Volca bass is like $150. Volca keys is $150. Volca kick is $100. The Behringer Crave and Behringer Cat are like my go-to instruments at this point, my go-to synthesizers at this point, both of them being semi-modular. Crave is like $150. Cat is $250, $270, something like that. And when you combine all of that, I have a small analog sequencer, which is like $100. all of these small format MIDI controllers. I have an external preamp, which is also like maybe $200 that I'm using, which is like a clone of a Neve 1073. I have a Squier bass, Squier Affinity, like entry level bass guitar, which is like $100, $120. You can buy it dirt cheap. And people go there, the only expensive piece of gear that I have are maybe even that's a mid-level instrument. It's like my Genelec 8040A or 8040B studio monitors that I'm using. They used to cost maybe $800 to $1,000 at the time when they came out. They're out of production right now, so I don't have the latest and greatest monitoring system out there. The only kind of call it like too expensive brand instrument that I have is my Fender Stratocaster, which is a Mexican one, which costs like $500. So it's not a vintage Fender 50s Strat or that sort of thing. And I have a Gibson Les Paul, which is like an entry level Gibson Les Paul, which costed me like $800 at the time when it came out in 2014. And I have a Harley Benton acoustic guitar, which is $50. That's what I use to make music.
There we go. Back in the days, it was just it was costing a fortune for all of us to start with something decent.
Yeah.
But today we are living in a time where cheap doesn't mean shit quality. It can be
exactly
great as it can be. It's all up to you now.
Yeah, it's super important that you said this on, for everybody listening, that you don't need crazy expensive gear to make something and to kind of get work or get creative. It's not like you need to get a certain crazy synth like the Prophet that costs an arm and a leg just to make great synth sounds. You can always kind of find different ways. You can always even use wavetables in your DAW to just create the sound you need. And as you said, Harley Benton stuff. Harley Benton, we're not sponsored by you, but if you're listening, they do great stuff for cheap stuff, and basically all these cheap guitars. I mean, I've been playing Squiers for a long time, and they sound great once, of course, after mixing and everything. And I think people should be able to think that they don't need to have a American Stratocaster to sound like Eric Clapton.
Exactly. It's all in your, Billy Gibbons from ZZ Top said, it's all in your fingers. The sound, the tone comes from your fingers. It's not your rack, it's not your gear, it's how you play it. And, it was also another lecture that I heard that was from Eddie Kramer as well at that time at the SAE conference. He said that he has his own, the best way that you can sound original is to sound like you. As shitty as, the gear that you have maybe is shitty, but it will be your sound and nobody will have that. I have my own impulse responses from my own reverbs. I have my own chamber reverb sound for vocals or for solo instruments, which I recorded in a bathroom. I just went, I put a speaker in a bathroom, I put a microphone in there, I recorded an impulse response, sampled it, put it into my convolution reverb, and you know what? It is a bathroom chamber reverb, but it's my bathroom chamber reverb.
Exactly.
And nobody has it. Not even, not even Hans Zimmer has that chamber reverb, that's the way you have to approach to your sounds. The best investment that I had when I started out was when I bought a portable recorder, a portable stereo recorder, which is and it is still up until today, my most important piece of gear is my Tascam DR40 field recorder, which I bring it with me whenever wherever I go. I sample stuff. I put those samples in my DAW. I process them with plugins, with stuff like that. I am even going more and more. I am beta testing for a lot of software companies, and I love doing that because I love helping out developers in, creating the best possible tools for for musicians and composers out there. And me being a working composer and a musician, I know what I need for my workflow, and those are like the feature requests that I'm suggesting to the developers. Some of them get into the actual software product, some of them don't, but either way, uh, when when I'm working on my mixes on stuff like that, as I said, I have so many plugins at my disposal, like from all the top major brands that I'm using, that I have legally obtained. So I'm not using any Russian versions from the internet.
Yeah.
So I have all of those licensed and stuff like that, and I have so many of things at my disposal, and then I am still going back to the stuff that I find myself the most comfortable with. I use stock plugins from Studio One when I'm using EQ, when I'm EQing stuff, tweaking, and I have Fab Filter Pro Q3, which everybody loves, and it is a really amazing software EQ. But I like my factory stock EQ plugin from Studio One. I have I'm always trying to find plugins that make me sound like me. So those are like a couple of, if you are interested in listening to hearing like my current top 5 plugins at this point is the stock EQ plugin from Studio One, which I'm always a fan of, a stock compressor from Studio One. I absolutely love Brainworks from Plugin Alliance, their Lindell channel strip, which is like an emulation of a Neve channel strip. That's my favorite stuff. Eventide Black Hole Reverb, which is, oh my god, that's all over my Starpoint Gemini soundtrack. It gives you that larger than life space sound. And I absolutely love, it's a dirt cheap plugin. It's like $30. It's called Cassette something. I can't even remember it. Just look it. I'll have to look it up. I have to look it up because it is such an amazing. It's such an amazing plugin, which basically it's perfect for that for Sketch Cassette 2 by Aberrant DSP. Yeah, it is a perfect tool for that lo-fi sound. You put that on top of your analog synth pad. So I run my Behringer synth through the Sketch Cassette, and you put the wobbles and stuff on all of it. It's immediately lo-fi sounds for ambient music. I absolutely love it. So those are my top 5 favorite plugins that I'm using at this point for my solo album, mini album that I'm working on right now.
Amazing.
Which is also a space synth music, space ambient music.
That's gonna be cool. So hopefully we'll get to hear that soon as well.
Yeah, it will be done by first half of January.
Beautiful.
So when we're still on here and we're still talking about how you should approach music, I did want to ask you, what would be that really big advice, or the kind of advice you want to give young composers, young producers who want to get into video game composing, and should they be afraid?
No, they shouldn't be afraid. This isn't, it's a fun industry to get in. It's a little bit difficult to get into, into the AAA stuff because, but if you show your skills and if you're persistent enough, I mean, I've been persistent for 8 years, so, persistent, you need to be persistent. And you need to be creative in order to stand out from the crowd. Like, that's the hardest part. Everything else it's just additional stuff that you need to do, like networking is important. Right now with all of this COVID situation and everything, we are all staying at our homes and everything, but once all the travel bans are lift up and everything, like just go visit your local game conventions, game conferences. You will, like, there's like 99.9% chance that you will find people who are working on games on those conferences, and that they need like either sound or music or something. Talk to them. The biggest advice and that I can give is just be creative, be yourself, and be an overall good guy. Be an overall good person, because people will always, no matter how talented you are, people won't work with you if you're an asshole.
There you go.
And I've seen a couple of really, really amazingly talented people who create some amazing music, and their careers went down the drain because they were assholes.
But did it happen just because that they had they didn't have the talent for, let's say, conversations or the social skills that they are capable of being nice about, or was it just that they were just assholes?
No, they were just assholes.
Okay, fair
Plain and
enough.
simple. All right.
I mean, that's also really important advice.
Yeah, don't be an asshole. Be an overall good guy. Be be unique. Like, as I said, have your own chamber reverb created in your bathroom. Like, seriously, and people were like, Abbey Roads doesn't have a chamber reverb like you have. That's the whole point of staying creative. And the one of the reasons that I love sampling and that I love working with analog synthesizers is that it gives you an opportunity to be creative. Like, a symphony orchestra sounds like a symphony orchestra. It is your way of using it that makes it sound like your own thing, okay? But when you have a sound creating machine that starts with a simple waveform, that's when things get interesting. And that's where you get to show people how much skills you have and how unique you are. When it comes to music theory and orchestral composing, we can always recognize certain styles of composing, like the sound of a certain composer, like John Williams has a different sound compared to Danny Elfman, compared to Hans Zimmer, compared to, like, definitely Trent Reznor, but that all of that, it goes, from understanding music theory, from understanding how instrumentation works, how to layer instrument in a symphony orchestra, how to write. For education is a really important part of, also your own sound, like having the know-how and how to use your tools, and how to, like, yeah, sure, I'm gonna compose for a symphony orchestra, but I don't have a clue how to voice my strings, but you need to know all of that stuff. You need to educate yourself in, like, if you want to work when it comes to orchestral music, when it comes to composing, you need to know your theory. You really need to know. As boring as it may sound, it is like the fundamental, most important thing. And when you understand your theory, and if you are creative enough, you will mold and you will mold that theoretical knowledge into your own sound to create something, unique. Like, for example, an epic brass sound for superhero movies. Like, you use like a regular, fifth chord, like a fifth chord that has like a root note, a third, and a fifth. But then if you play it on your regular keyboard, like you play it as like you play your root, your third, and your fifth in the same octave, it will sound like crap. Okay? So for example, spreading all of that just tiny little bit, for example, you shift that third up an octave and you have just enough space between your root and your fifth and your third which is an octave higher, for example. And then you add another root an octave higher and you can get your string sounds like that. A beautiful, epic string chord for like a superhero movie, or like your brass sounds, which is like mostly people are using it that way. So like knowing how to shift chords, how to have turnarounds and stuff like that, it's important to know. So to summarize, know your theory, kids. Be yourself and don't be an asshole.
There we go.
Those are like the 3 pillars of having a successful career in composing for films and games.
For our dear listeners, it's never an excuse to talk about talent. Talent in this genre or in this business itself, it's just maybe, I don't know if you would agree with me, but maybe 5% or 10% tops.
Mm-hmm.
But the rest is just practice, spend your time, spare your time, and try to be good at it. And as you said, just the manners. Practice on the manners a little
Absolutely.
bit as well.
Exactly. Exactly, yeah.
And it's also important to stay curious and to kind of get out of your comfort zone, because I think that is exactly where you kind of find your sound, quote unquote, your sound, is when you just kind of mix and match all the things that you find interesting and intriguing. And even just trying things that you would never even try, like, I don't know, pick up a balalaika and put some reverb on it. You never know what it'll sound like.
Exactly.
I have one of the more interesting things that I like doing when I'm designing my own sounds and instruments for like a feature film or for a video game, for example, is try to get organic sounds and make them sound synthetic. Like put your strings through your analog synth filter and add that into a reverb and have that filter overdriven while patching the output of your filter back into the input of the filter, and you create like a really huge gnarly synth pad that is natural and organic in its core, and put it through an eventide black hole, and it's like, there you go, your ambient music right there.
Amazing. Nikola, this huge episode was amazing to listen to.
Yeah.
This was very inspiring.
And we have one more question, because I think everyone's going to wonder, what games are you into? What games do you play on your downtime?
Oh, okay. So at this moment, I recently wrapped up playing Assassin's Creed Origins, and I really enjoyed it. So my preferred genre of games are the single player adventure games, which is, I like storytelling, I like everything. So the games that I'm mostly into, I own every console out there. So I mean, I used to own, actually. Right now I own only an Xbox, and I have a PC, but I'm not playing that much on my PC at this point, because I like sitting into my couch and just having a controller and playing while lying down or just enjoying and relaxing. So most of the games that I love and that I've played and that I have enjoyed the most are the games of such genre, like the Uncharted series. Definitely one of my all-time favorites.
Amazing.
Like all 5 of the Uncharted games. The Last of Us. What else? Of course, Assassin's Creed, Dark Souls. I'm one of the
Come on, do you like to
Dark
torture
Souls.
yourself or what?
I actually, I play in Dark Souls. I play as a wizard, which is like playing Dark Souls on easy mode. But I love the lore. I love the lore and the storytelling in Dark Souls. By playing Dark Souls as close quarter combat, warrior like a knight or a barbarian, it can get really, really messy
Oh
really
yeah.
fast.
Yeah,
You know?
there's no easy mode in Dark Souls. You just get good.
In Dark Souls. Yeah, it's just you just get good. But those are like the single player adventure games that I really enjoy the most. Right now, at this point, I'm playing Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order, which is like, Uncharted set in a Star Wars universe where you're playing as a Jedi. And it really is an amazing game, and the soundtrack is beautiful. It's just beautiful. Multiplayer wise, like my all-time favorite game is definitely Halo. That is what I'm playing. When it comes to multiplayer, I'm usually playing first-person shooters in a multiplayer, so I'm playing Halo. I'm even playing games that I've worked on. I play a lot of Destiny 2 on Xbox Live, with the guys from my own clan. I've also played a lot of Tom Clancy's The Division. Uh, that is like my current career goal is to compose music for a Tom Clancy game like Division, Ghost Recon, Rainbow Six, Splinter Cell, that type of games.
Beautiful.
I love that type of stuff. But right now, currently at this point, I'm playing Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. I've wrapped up Assassin's Creed Origins. When I finish Star Wars, I am going back to Assassin's Creed to play Odyssey. And I am still waiting for a perfect, for some sort of a vacation that I can dedicate myself to actually playing Cyberpunk. I still haven't played it yet, even though I have it, but I just didn't have the time. It really is Cyberpunk, and all of the CD Projekt Red games are the type of game that you need to invest time
Oh, yeah.
so you can properly
At least 100 hours or
enjoy.
so.
Yeah, it's like over 100 hours.
I mean,
of
I have 300
playing
hours
there.
on Witcher, so
Ouch.
I know how it is.
Yeah.
Nikola, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast. This has been a fantastic episode. Before we leave and say goodbye, why don't you plug yourself? Tell us what you're working on right now, where people can find you, and what future plans do you have in the next following years?
Well, right now, I am actually working on a couple of games. One of them I'm under NDA, so I cannot tell you anything. It's not a AAA, but it is in this, it has that AAA quality to it. But I'm working with a Danish studio from Slipgate Ironworks, composing composing for a dark fantasy game called Graven. So you guys can check that out on Steam and wishlist it. It really is an old school type of game, because it is a game that's created by guys who used to work on games like Quake and Duke Nukem and Max Payne and stuff like that. So it really is an international team of game developers. And it really is an honor to work with these guys. So Graven is something that I'm working on right now. I got an idea when I saw that I'm gonna have a couple of days of spare time to create some music for myself, which I haven't done in many years. So I've decided to create my own mini album of like 5 tracks, inspired and based on my composition, on my music soundtrack for a video game, Starpoint Gemini 3. So I'm still going into that ambient synth, sci-fi sound. And I've given myself a challenge. I am using only 2 analog synths in order to get all the sounds. I'm using outboard processing and a couple of my favorite plugins in there. So I'm using only my Behringer Crave and my Behringer Cat synths. Those are the only, and I am, creating a whole bunch of sounds with them, and then I'm processing them with Sound Toys effects rack. I'm using my Eventide plugins and some distortions, lo-fi stuff like the cassette, and that's the album that's the stuff that I'm working on right now. And then in mid-February, I am going back to SAE Institute to start teaching another a new set of courses for game music composition. So let's see who applies there. So, and people can hear my music on my website, NikolaNikitaJeremić.com. There's my portfolio. There is a Starpoint Gemini 3 soundtrack on Bandcamp, on iTunes, on Spotify. You can listen to it over there as well. Starpoint Gemini Warlords is also a soundtrack that I composed that's on Spotify and I think Deezer. So that's where you can, hear my music. They can, find me on YouTube, like Nikola Nikita Jeremić. Over there, see a couple of, there's some tutorials about, me using some plugins and stuff like that, how to get certain sounds and stuff like that. So, I don't have a whole bunch of followers, and it's not my intention to gather a mass of, followers. I just post videos like that and see if people find it interesting and, useful. So there are some, ideas and, tutorials on how to get certain sounds, how to approach a certain, a certain issue in sound design, certain topic and that sort of thing. So yeah, but mostly right now, what I'm really, really enjoying is working on this solo album of mine. It's like, can you call it an EP? Like it's 5 tracks. I don't know. LP, it's like a full length album. A single is just 1 track. Is this like an EP? I don't know the terminology, but I think it's like an EP that's like 5 tracks, like sub 10 tracks, something like that. So this is gonna have like 5 tracks of, sci-fi ambient music, that's based on my works on Starpoint Gemini franchises. That's it.
Wonderful.
All right, perfect. That's pretty much it. Thank you everyone for listening, and thank you, Nikola, for being our guest.
Thank you for inviting me. It really is a pleasure to talk about these things.
It's a pleasure to hear about these things as well. I mean, this was really cool and a lot of insight, and I think a lot of people will find this interesting. So, Efe, you want to sign us off?
Of course. Nikola, again, thank you so very much for joining us. This has been a great inspiration for all of us, and I'm sure for the listeners as well. And Alex, maybe you can tell your name. I can.
Okay, let's do it like that. Let's go that back and forth. Okay.
Yeah.
Go on.
All right, this is Efe.
And this is Alex.
And you have listened to the Mothership podcast. See you on the next episode.
Bye-bye.